There's a story that came out in Politico. In fact, not just one. One came out in PBS. Basically, 74 people who knew Joe Biden and could talk about the allegations about Tara Reade. Politico comes out with one. Now, Politico one is that much more special because Politico is basically arguing, and I'm paraphrasing, Tara Reade was poor and Tara Reade had money difficulties, and because Tara Reade had money difficulties, whether or not Biden did this is in question. It's like, what? What does her poverty have to do with being assaulted? There's also another case where they kind of make the point that she was talking fondly of her time in the office. But in other cases, she did mention to various people, even in the article, that there was sexual assault taking place in the office or sexual harassment. I guess I'm making the point that I don't see what her poverty has to do with her being sexually assaulted. They're trying to say she's deceitful and everything else, and the people who she talked to is a landlord or two landlords, one that evicted her. And basically what they're complaining about is she was a bad tenant who was broke all the time. That's the article. I put it, read for yourself. Let's go through parts of this article so I can show you what I mean. Basically, she didn't have any money. She was down on her luck. She didn't have any money. She was down on her luck. Not having any money was problematic. I had to evict her. And it's like, but what does that have to do with the sexual assault? It's such a weird article. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, like, share, subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. Look, I suppose anybody who comes out with a story, there's going to be competing narratives for it. But man, I couldn't imagine coming out with a story where there was very little upside for you. And basically, they just rip your life apart and find everybody who you've basically owed money to or had a bad experience with and put that in an article as if it has something to do with the allegations. Keep in mind, Tara Reade is not in the public eye because she played basketball. She's not, in the public eye because she could throw a football 40 yards. She's in the public eye very specifically for making allegations about Joe Biden, meaning anything that is being put out about her is in some way going to have to correlate to those allegations. Otherwise, it wouldn't necessarily make sense. It's like she has blue eyes. Okay, why are you telling me that? I could see that for myself. Anything that they're putting out in these papers is related to either her credibility or the case itself. Otherwise, they wouldn't be talking about it. So in Politico's case, it goes to her credibility. Otherwise, why are they calling her deceitful? Why are they using these people who are basically taking the piss out of her for being poor? It's, what it puts me in mind of? It's like a cop murders a kid and then they leak to the press, he had marijuana in the system. And it's like, clean kill. Clean kill. I mean, he was clearly out of it because, he smoked a joint. That's what this feels like. They're basically going through her life, ripping her life apart in order to take the piss out of her and undermine her story. Let's take a look at a few sections of this. Rye and her husband knew Reade as Tara McCabe, the woman who had rented a yurt in their 12-acre California property and tended to the couple's horses and her own for about 10 months beginning in 2017. They were well acquainted with the former tenant who frequently knocked on the door of their home seeking emotional support, asking for financial help or forgiveness for the late payments which they granted. I would sit down with her and talk to her and try to be encouraging and supportive, said Rye, who noted Reade had heart and some good qualities. Ain't that nice? The lack of money was highly problematic for her. She was always on the ropes in that way. So as you get, further, this kind of breaks apart. After her husband suffered a brain injury that forced the couple to sell the property, Rye said Reade turned on them. She became really difficult, Rye said. She said, "You're going to have to pay to make me leave." She was manipulative, said Rye, self-described feminist and social activist. She was always saying she was going to get it together, but she couldn't, you couldn't help her. Okay, she was poor. That's basically what you're telling me. She was poor. Politico interviewed more than a dozen people, many of whom interacted with Reade through her involvement in the animal rescue community. Again, nothing to do with the assault. And just because she engaged with somebody from the standpoint of a tenant doesn't mean she would have exposed what took place in that office in the context of being assaulted. Yes, she was poor, clearly. Yes, she sounded like she was a bad tenant. Fair enough. I don't know what that has to do with her being assaulted. A number of those in close contact with Reade over the past 12 years, a period in which she went by the name Tara Reade, Tara McCabe, or Alexandra McCabe, laid out a familiar pattern. Reade ingratiated herself, explained that she was down on her luck and needed help, and eventually took advantage of their goodwill to extract money, skip rent payments, or walk out on other bills. She was poor. She was poor. You've caught her. You've caught her. She was broke. All of this is just basically her being in poverty. Here's another one. Chung said Reade led him to believe that she had broken up with her ex-husband. He was so moved by Reade's story. He said he did extra work on her house to prepare it for her and her daughter, who today is an adult. Chung provided emails to show that he offered to pick up paint for Reade. That's great. But then the payments came in late, month after month. Her explanations always were sincere and convincing, Chung said. So he reduced the rent and tried to come up with a compromise. Eventually, however, he had to evict Reade. Chung said that he is in contact with others who have had similar bad experiences and run-ins with Reade. Did she think that all of the people she ran over would just roll over and die and forget about her? No, I recognize her face, he said. Now, this is basically impugning her character in order to push back or point to the whole Joe Biden thing. As for the other 74 Democrats or 74 people that they were talking to, I have no idea those guys' political ideology. And right now you have a situation where, let's say 2 years ago, Democrats would have been all in saying a president or a person who's trying to get into the elected office who has a sexual assault is disqualifying. Whereas now, not so much because it's Joe Biden. Here's another one. Reade shared that she had been the victim of domestic abuse and was taking some time to study for a bar exam. Reade, who graduated from Seattle University School of Law in 2004, asked Klett if she could have a break on rent. She also dropped a big political name, said Klett. She spoke to me about Joe Biden and her experience with him, said Klett, who also noted that Reade said she helped work on the Violence Against Women Act, which passed in 1994. It was positive in a bragging sense. But Reade struggled to make even the reduced rent payments of $200 a month, always asked for more time or for a pass, according to Klett. Eventually, Klett told her she had to leave. I'm still waiting to get my law books back. Now, one of the interesting things right here, Klett, an attorney and domestic violence victims advocate, was sold. She took in Reade, gave her a lower rent rate, and even loaned her a battery of law books and test prep materials. Now again, she was broke. It's like we talked to all of these people who were renting her property, and she was poor and she had a hard time paying the rent payments. One of the other things that they make is sometimes people who were sexually assaulted talk positive of their victims in certain situations. What may be happening here, at least for her, is if she indeed was broke and she finds herself to have some level of gravitas in regards to the position she was working in Washington, she may look back on those days with a certain degree of pride at what she was doing. By the same token, still have this kind of weird confliction that she was being harassed. I guess I'm making the point that one doesn't necessarily negate the other. This is kind of like what they say about Trump, where they would argue, well, Trump didn't put sanctions on Russia, and that proves that Trump was working with the Russians. And it's like, well, yeah, but if Trump puts sanctions on Russia, you're basically implying that the Russians helped Trump get elected, which delegitimizes his presidency. From that particular point of view, I wouldn't put sanctions on him either. I got in on my own merits. You're not going to have me to basically impugn my own election. Look, I put the article where you can read for yourself. A former neighbor told Business Insider that Reade spoke of the assault in the mid-1900s. A work colleague from around the same time told the publication that Reade complained of her sexual harassment in Biden's office. A document filed by Reade's ex-husband in 1996 also states that Reade had complained of harassment. Now, this is at the very end of the document, after basically all of this, that she was poor. A document of poverty. You got her. She was broke. You got her. I don't know what that has to do. She never talked about the sexual assault period or anything inappropriate with him. But again, why would she bring that up? Like, it's a weird thing to say that she would just bring this up to random people like this, especially landlords who she's in a fiduciary relationship with, and apparently not necessarily the best of relationship with, since she couldn't necessarily pay the rent. To this day, Biden has not accounted for his actions other than to say it never happened. Biden will not consent to a review of his records housed at the University of Delaware. Ms. Reade, on the other hand, has answered hundreds of questions in sit-down, hour-long interviews with Megyn Kelly. Wigler, I think that's a lawyer, now she's being asked to account for period or for prior landlord-tenant disputes. Enough is enough. This degrading and irrelevant inquisition does not advance the conversation. Instead, it explains why so many women suffer in silence for fear of having their lives turned upside down and questioned. You basically ripped her life apart in order to say she was broke all throughout the course of her life and had a difficult time dealing with her landlords. She was a bad tenant and she was poor. I have no idea what that has to do with whether or not she was assaulted. Basically, this sounds like they're arguing she was poor, so, be real skeptical of the assault claims. They're unrelated. They're utterly and entirely unrelated. This was just a smear piece where you were just taking the piss out of her. Congratulations. A woman who basically said she was assaulted, you basically went through her life, ripped her life apart in order to publicize all of her difficulties in regards to paying her rent. Congratulations. You got her. Like, share,